welcome to the third reading group for On Hannah Arendt. My name is Richard Saltoun, founder of Richard Saltoun Gallery in London, and tonight's event is organized in connection with my gallery's year-long series of exhibitions inspired by Arendt's 1968 publication, Between Past and Future. Today's discussion focuses on Arendt's second essay entitled The Concept of History, Ancient and Modern. The essay has been used as the basis for the gallery's current exhibition, a solo presentation of paintings, drawings and sculpture by artist Peter Kennard, one of Britain's most important political artists and who joins us here today. For those of you who won't be able to see the exhibition, which is probably all of us, there is a guided video tour of the exhibition with Peter and gallery director Neve Coughlin, and that's available on the gallery website for those who are interested. Today's reading group is developed in partnership with Roger Berkowitz, founder and director of the Hannah Arendt Center for Politics and Humanities at Bard College, and I'll shortly hand over to Roger. Today's special guest is Ken Krimstein, a cartoonist at the New Yorker since 2011. He's also the author of a fascinating, critically acclaimed portrait of Hannah Arendt that's called The Three Escapes of Hannah Arendt, published in 2018 by Bloomsbury, and still available on Amazon and a very good read. In October, Ken will be publishing another graphic story called When I Grow Up, the Lost Autobiography of 6 Yiddish Teens. Finally, thank you to everybody who joins us here today. And without further ado, I hand over to Roger. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, and welcome everybody. This is a great opportunity. First of all, the whole reading series that Richard has put together on Between Past and Future. Today, as he said, we're reading The Concept of History. Honestly, probably one of the most difficult texts Hannah Arendt wrote, and yet a really wonderful and rich inquiry into why the historization and the becoming history of politics has been so dangerous in her mind to the modern world. Our guide today is Ken Krimstein, someone I've known for about 5 or 6 years since he was started to work on this wonderful book, The Three Escapes of Hannah Arendt, which I commend to you all. The subtitle is A Tyranny of Truth. It's really a great narrative, and you can learn a lot about Hannah Arendt in it, but it's also a great read. And I know it's been translated into many languages and has had enormous success. In doing so, I think there could have been an easy way to do this and just quickly tell the story that everyone knew, but Ken really immersed himself in both the story and the philosophy and thinking of Hannah Arendt, and it comes through in the book, and he's become someone who really has a lot to say about Arendt and her importance in the world. I've been fortunate enough to talk to him many times about Arendt and his book, and it's been always a wonderful experience. So I'm thrilled to have him here. Ken, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. And it's really wonderful to be here, wherever here is, to be everywhere. I want to thank Richard for putting on this very Arendtish kind of event. I want to thank Roger for the introduction and chucking me the most difficult essay, but one that actually I really, really liked. When I went back to my battered copy of it, I noticed it was very, very scarred from when I first was diving into my book, and it was wonderful to re-explore it. I'd like to thank Lindsay and Stella, who had been here the previous couple of weeks, and I'd like to thank all of you guys for showing up. So I'm going to share my screen and take you on a little bit of a journey through this. And here we go. You don't want to see the baseball. I'm getting my son. You want to see this. And I'd like to start this whole talk with that eminent philosopher and poet, Sam Cooke. Don't know why we don't hear it. Oh, well, too bad the song's not going, but you all know it. Imagine Sam Cooke's singing. Don't know much about history, don't know much biology, don't know much about a science book, don't know much about the French I took, but I do know that I love you, and I know that if you love me too, what a wonderful world this would be. When we can only follow up Sam Cooke's words with the words of Hannah Arendt. Oh, here it comes. Well, we get to hear it. Sorry, I had to push another button. And Hannah, of course, follows that up with, if only world history were not so awful, it would be a joy to live. So my task here is to square these. And I also to get rid of this stuff on the side of my screen, which I don't know how to do. All right. So the concept of history. Well, be warned. She's elephant hunting. I don't mean that literally. I mean that in a term I once heard. She's going after some very, very big targets here. She's got Marx, and she's got Freud, and she's got Einstein in her sights here. I'm so desperately. She's also got Stalin and Hitler, and heaven forbid, whoever might come next in her sights as well. And to do this in this essay, she proposes, or I would say she actually enacts, a kind of experiment, which is really, I think, a good way of participating in this chapter. It's, you don't even read it, you sort of participate in it. But before this, we have to be warned. When you do an experiment, you need warning. So when I first moved to New York, when the subways looked like that, there used to be a particular ad on the subways that always caught my attention because I needed its help. It was for a product, the ROACH motel. We had a lot of roaches in New York, and we had to get these little motels. You could see there's a picture on it. But the thing that really struck me was the slogan for the ROACH motel. The roaches check in, but they don't check out. So the warning here is with Hannah Arendt, beware. You can check into Hannah Arendt, but you're never going to check out. That's just a little guideline there. So what is she after here? How does she start this? Well, the little topic, tiny little topic, immortality. I mean, whoa, I'm getting an echo. Let me just go back to that for a second. Anyways, what is this? This is fireworks. This is, all right, between past and future. That was why I was showing the fireworks, because between the past and the future, it's just an immediate experience that goes away. I mean, the minute you say something, you're not there anymore, you're in the future. Or are you in the past? Or are you in the future? That moment, that's one that she talks about. So now I'm saying it's Greek to me. She starts out talking about ancient history. She starts out talking about ancient Greek history in this experiment. And for people in that world, in that time, life was a giant circle game. It was a giant circle. You're born, you eat, you love, you die, rinse, repeat. It just goes in a circle. The world was eternal, it was immortal, and she kind of said it was without meaning. And I want to pay attention to that word meaning. It comes back, but it was a circle. But there was only one thing, a thing that the first historians noticed, and she talks about some of the first historians that busted this circle, that broke out of this circle. And here's a little animation. There's the circle, and there are some things breaking out of it. And the subject matter of history, she calls these interruptions. She calls them the extraordinary, in other words. So men, actions of people broke out, heroic players. Now, with that sense of disrupting that circle with some of the primary historians, let's try and go back to unpacking this rather gnarly essay, or rather dissecting it. And here I have to give you guys another warning. And it's a good one. And Lindsay sort of referenced it in her talk about the style of Hannah Arendt and the writings that she does. And it's so kind of, there's such a method to her form that you have to proceed carefully. And I almost make it akin to trying to think about it as if she's writing like humor. So we turn to E.B. White's famous quotation, analyzing humor is like dissecting a frog. Few people are interested and the frog dies. So you got to be careful when you're analyzing Hannah Arendt's writing. There's a lot going on. This is a quote, another quote from Hannah that gave me a lot of guidance when I was working on mine. And it's very empowering, and it gives a lot of sense of what she's at. Storytelling reveals meaning without committing the error of defining it. She's telling a kind of a story here. She's doing a thought experiment. But what is her game? What does this essay reveal? Well, I think we can say she's erecting an edifice. She's trying to tackle something. She's trying to take something down. And she's asking, which perhaps maybe Roger can speak to later, maybe it's always her question, how and why have things gone so wrong? And what the hell can we do about it? Meaning, this is a word I also want to ask Roger about later. It comes back and it comes back and it comes back. What's it mean? Ethics. This is something that I know in the book I pointed out that the last sort of major tome that she was working on when she expired was called On Judgment. It was the third part of sort of this trilogy, The Life of the Mind, that was posthumously published. But ethics, and in some of my reading in philosophy, one of the big questions with existentialism, and you could kind of categorize her in a way as a kind of existential thinker maybe, but the question of ethics and existentialism is really kind of difficult. So that's another thing that this causes me to think about. And then there's immortality again. And she quotes and refers to the Greek goddess, I believe, Mnemosyne. I don't know how to pronounce it. Whatever. Mnemosyne, whatever. But that notion is very, very critical. And there's a book that I read as I was working on my last book. And it's called, it's about On Forgetting. And it's by Lewis Hyde, who's an incredible writer, also wrote about a lot of cultural issues, but he's writing about forgetting, the importance of memory and the importance of forgetting. And then the question that I always have about Hannah Arendt, why does she care so much? Why does she care so much? So she describes a corruption, I believe. And it comes back to one of the great sayings that I think informs a lot of what I think about her. Man does not inhabit the world, men do. Or perhaps to put it another way, man does not inhabit the world, human beings do. And my little asterisk is that I would add women, children, animals. But whenever I read that quote from Hannah, I forgive me for calling her Hannah, but I will. Man does not inhabit the world. I think of some sort of professor saying, man this, nothing against professors, man that, man does not inhabit the world. Men do. Women do. And a very avid reader, up on her Heisenberg, and she finds fault with science too, not just social science. Because human beings, faulty, changeable human beings, a man, a woman, another man, we inhabit the world. Oh, and then there's that tricky thing called observation bias. So she's very skeptical of having a full understanding that some people purport. It's clear that she feels that humans need meaning. And if we think about what's going on in the world now, computers kind of don't. Computers don't really need meaning, but they run a lot of things. This was an interesting part, and I know Roger alluded to it in his preface, where she talks about how taste, and I put glory, because I know one of the things that she really leans into in trying to understand the world is Pericles' funeral oration, where she talks about how we learn from actions, and taste is fleeting. And another word, and you could really see it coming up sort of in 1968 or whenever this particular essay was written, although I think it bears keeping in mind, is fabrication and process. Replace making, which she has a real idea of what making is. You know, what humans do. It's one of the things we do. We labor, we make, and we act. And I guess just mentioning that, when you say fabrication, one thinks of that immortal line from The Graduate, plastics, fabrication. Well, I know other speakers have alluded to this, but it's impossible not to when you're talking about history, and this is a scene in my book as well. But this is Paul Klee, the painting Angelus Novus, and I believe the last speaker, Sela, referred to the fact of how much Walter Benjamin found in that piece of work. I know from some people who, particularly Jerome Cohn, who had an opportunity to work with Hannah, she referred to Walter Benjamin as Benji, which I find that really interesting, Benji. I mean, they were very close. One of the things that I was delighted to discover when I was making the book is the very, very deep connections between them. But this concept of history brings up Benjamin, and he's just such a fascinating thinker, and the links there are very strong. So this is the great quote that he pulls out of that work of art about progress in history. His face is turned toward the past, where we perceive a chain of events. He sees one single catastrophe, which keeps piling wreckage upon wreckage and hurls it in front of his feet. The angel would like to stay, awaken the dead, and make whole what has been smashed. But a storm is blowing from paradise. It has got caught in his wings with such violence that the angel can no longer close them. The storm irresistibly propels him into the future, to which his back is turned, while the pile of debris before him grows skyward. And the storm is what we call progress. Kind of an amazing interpretation of this notion of history being a linear upward connected tissue of process. And out of this comes this idea of that now we feel we have this sense of hubris, we have this sense of power that we can act into nature, and we actually are. We're making elements, we're changing the climate, we're doing all these kinds of things. So we are actually showing that we can, as man, we're getting this encouragement. Yes, you are powerful. Yeah, you are all powerful. And it's not just making the bomb, but I think, and if you look at some of Hannah Arendt's essays, like in The Human Condition, where she starts out talking about going into space, yeah, Mr. Musk, with all apologies, putting humans on Mars or wherever we want to put them, it's an open question, because she says part of the human condition is we live on this planet. And I think this sort of acting into nature is even something that is a byproduct of this hive mind we would call of the internet. Because technology is neutral. It can be good or bad. It can be glorious or evil. We have to, I don't think we even know what we've unleashed with this hive mind. But anyways, back to history. So history should be more than just a time sequence, a process, a story of progress. And back to Benji. He says history is the history of catastrophe. He says there's no document of civilization that is not at the same time a document of barbarism. But within that, he's looking, and Hannah Arendt has talked about this, and this really guides a lot of what I'm trying to do in my work, of this diving for pearls. And he taught Benjamin, and I would say maybe Hannah Arendt, in a way that she looks at what history should be, is it's a historian is a chronicler of events who recites events without without major and minor ones, according to the following truth. Nothing has ever happened that should be lost for history. And, you know, in her book, where she talks Men in Dark Times, Adorno criticized Walter Benjamin for just putting everything down, this kind of bricolage where he talked about everything. And Hannah Arendt says, when Adorno criticized Benjamin's, quote, wide-eyed presentation of actualities, he hit the nail right on the head. This is precisely what Benjamin was doing and wanted to do. It was an attempt to, quote, capture the portrait of history as the most significant representations of reality. It scraps it as if it were. And I think what she's trying to do here is show that plurality, the fact that man does not inhabit the world, but a man does, is to show that we can't fabricate history. There's too many players. And Marx proposes that we can. He proposes an end of meaning, an end of history. And I think it's important at this point to consider these words from Hannah Arendt when she was awarded the Lessing Prize, and it was a huge deal. This is like the Pulitzer Prize and more in Germany. And a lot of her work is about throwing bombs or provocations, we would say. And so she cites Lessing directly, and she says, may my ideas always be somewhat disjunct or even appear to contradict each other, if only they are ideas in which readers will find material that stirs them to think for themselves. Think for themselves. Again, what's the truth? What does man do? No, think for yourself. So sorry, Carl, there is no end of history. If there is, means become ends, and anything is permitted. So do we sense an ending? I'm kind of taking you through. I think we're coming to an ending in her essay. So on the bottom of this, there's my marked up copy. Human action. Why is this bad to think we can make a process of history? Human action projected into a web of relationships where many and opposing ends are pursued almost never fulfills its original intention. No act can ever be recognized by its author as his own with the same happy certainty with which a piece of work can, because we throw it into this world where there's zillions of people that all have their own act. So she says we got to face reality, blow up biases. And I think now we're really coming to the tour de force, and Roger also alluded to this epilogue. I think here's where, if you think of it as a story or as an experiment, now the results start to come in. And it has a sense of tragic power. And how can we deceive us? Why is this misuse of history bad? Again, there's my marked up copy. And if you look at the one in the middle, the historian, by gazing backward into the historical process, has been so accustomed to deserving an objective meaning, independent of the aims and awareness of the actors, that he's liable to overlook what actually happened in his attempt to discern some trend, some objective trend. He will, for example, overlook the particular characteristics of Stalin's totalitarian dictatorship in favor of the industrialization of the Soviet Empire, or of the nationalistic aims, or as they used to say of Mussolini, well, he made the trains run on time. And finally, back to Benji. I'm getting there. But I have to quote this other philosopher that I really follow, Art Spiegelman, the author of Mouse. And Spiegelman says, and I love this, comics, the comic form that I work in, comics are the art of turning time back into space. Very interesting thought. So here's a scene that I concocted for my book. And Hannah Arendt is having coffee with, or drinks with, Walter Benjamin in Paris. Walter, what good is all this talk? He's been telling her about the Arcades Project, and he's been telling her about all this. You know, they were actually Carol mates at the Bibliothèque Nationale for a while. Walter, what good is all this talk? No good. No good at all. There's nothing to be gained from it. It's a game. I'm an Alekhine, the chess player, who looks at checkmate and must rebuild every move of the entire game backwards. Why? Benjamin says, because we are all standing atop a crumbling mast of a sinking ship, gasping for air, sweet air, before it sinks full fathom 5. Just open your eyes, Hannah. All we know for certain is ruin and decay. Isn't it grand? And then my character of Hannah says, Walter, even for you, I'm having a hard time picking up the pieces of what you're saying. He says, try me. And my interpretation is, she says, so you believe that to get on, we must learn to predict the past and to forget the future. Like, it's all turned on its head. There's no more sense of linear progress. And then he goes something like that, excuse me, I shall pass out. But I'm trying to provoke this destruction, if you will, of this harmful notion that that there's this linear path, that because it cuts a lot of people out. And Hannah ends it, and in the end, she wants to reclaim, or very possibly to claim, since this is all immediate, in this impossible moment between the past and the future, a very, very simple thing. I think that's what she wants to do in this essay. A world common to all human beings. And that's easy, isn't it?
Yeah.
So thank you very much. I shall stop sharing the screen and annoying myself with these things.
Thank you, Ken. That was wonderful. Really, you got to a heart of, I think, so much in this essay. You know, it's hard to know where to begin, but maybe just with how you ended. You ended with her concern for the common world, right? Which is one of the central concerns of all of her work. And at the very end of the epilogue, which is where you're talking about, on page 89, at the very bottom, leading into 90, you know, she says that in the situation of radical world alienation, neither history nor nature is at all conceivable. And it strikes me, that's the first sentence I'm going to read. I'm going to read one more, but that's a sentence that we have to grapple with in order to understand an essay called The Concept of History. I mean, what she's saying is neither history nor nature is conceivable. So the concept of history is not possible in a situation of world alienation. And I think in many ways, this essay, which is a precursor to her thinking in the human condition, is really about her idea of world alienation. And in the next sentence, she says, this twofold loss of the world, namely the historical and the natural world, the loss of nature and the loss of human artifacts in the widest sense, which include all of history, has left behind it a society of men who, without a common world, which would at once relate and separate them, either live in desperate, lonely separation or are pressed together into a mass. So the common world, right, which is what you said she's concerned with, is, I think, the reason she's interested in this question of the turn to history, because the concept of history, which she says is not conceivable, is what leaves us without a common world. Do you have thoughts on,
you know,
on that?
I mean, this is where I started to see it again as a kind of experiment, where, because one of the things that's very, very troubling to me about all philosophers, in fact, and when I was in college, we read Plato's Republic, and you know, aside from the fact that he hates music and all that other stuff, he presents this ideal world, and how do you actualize it? And oh, you can't. And I'm really, really interested and depressed a little bit by the thought that this world of plurality that I think Arendt sees and is so important, I don't want that to just be a philosophical pipe dream. So I started to really dig into, like, why is she doing this essay? And I think what she's saying is that there was a time when, or there was a way of talking narrative of what happened, that when it wasn't perverted by this notion of, it's every day in every way, it's getting better and better all the time, which I think detracts in a way from the common world. And, I saw this notion, and I think your reading of it is right. And I know it's been almost 50 years since she's been gone, but maybe, that possibility is ever present because of her thing about natality, so I'm always, it's like I said with the Roach Motel, I've checked in and I can't check out. And a lot of people say, oh, you can't do this. It can't happen. Can't happen. Can't happen. Well, excuse me, in the course of a week, the entire world shut down. Venice's lagoon started getting clean. I mean, that's the thing, So I tend to look at the glass a little bit more half full, even though she lived through terrible times. Maybe that's why she cared so much. So, but I think what she's trying to show is that if we can, and there are a lot of nuances, you're right, in the historiography in there, and she may be painting too bright of a picture of the ancient Greek past, but I think the turn to this notion of progress maybe separated people. So that's kind of how I see it.
Oh, I think that's right. Yeah, I think you did a good job with her elephant hunting of many people in this essay, primarily Marx. The danger of Marx is that he provides us with a theory of history, which, whether it's a theory of totalitarianism or Russia, and it ignores too many particulars, and it seeks to achieve some end, and it's just one pattern among many. And this brings up what she says, what Marx really does, I guess, is two things: take away the particulars and take away meaning, right? And you raised this question of meaning and storytelling, which is absolutely central to her work, and I think absolutely central to this particular essay. What is it that history does that, in a sense, takes away storytelling, when history is supposed to be storytelling, right? History is supposed to be the telling of a story. And that's what, as you said earlier, the Greeks and Romans and others thought history was. It was storytelling in response to particular individual events. And that's the difference, is that in the modern concept of history, it's not storytelling that responds to events by plurality of
right. And
yeah,
and if I could interrupt for a second, she adds, and I think you mentioned this, or one of the other, somewhere I picked it up. I think it's either Thucydides or Herodotus or one of those people that I studied, when they acknowledged that both sides had a story to tell. It's not just the history of the victors. Now, Benjamin and these people say history is the history of the losers, which is probably a pretty good way of looking at history. The people who don't have voices, history is written by the victors. But the fact that these early historians could actually look at the world and say, both sides need to be heard when you're telling that history, I think that's maybe why she celebrates that.
Absolutely. I mean, she thinks, this, one of the controversial, and here's the elephant hunting of Einstein and others, right? Or not Einstein, but the scientists. She thinks that objectivity is not even real in natural science, right? And she takes that from Schrodinger and Heisenberg, and we could get into some interesting arguments with some natural scientists about that. But she's clear that there is no objectivity, certainly in history or social science. And she says that what really mattered was not objectivity, was impartiality. And that's the beautiful line where that's that beautiful section you're talking about, where she says that Homer really discovered impartiality, that he could tell the great deeds of Hector as well as Achilles, and that this is the idea of seeing the world. As she says, the Greeks, this is on page 51, the Greeks learned to exchange his own viewpoint, his own opinion, with those of his fellow citizens. The Greeks learned to understand, not to understand one another as individual persons, but to look upon the same world from one another's standpoint and see it in the very same, in a very different and frequently opposing aspect. And so I just want to point out that for her, to understand, which is to see impartially from different viewpoints, is another word for making meaning. She uses understanding and meaning largely interchangeably at times. Understanding, reconciliation, thinking, making meaning. And so this turn to the impartiality of the Greeks is part of what we lose when we try and see history as a concept or see it through patterns that have some sort of
Right.
unidimensional
And she talks about lying, and she says that because when it's just a process or a pattern or a thing, if you lie enough, you can just change the template. Yeah. Because it says it's like green is blue, green is blue, green is blue, and soon everybody will think green is blue, and you're in the green is blue world. And that's a hiding from reality. And again, what I love so much about is the, and that's why I mentioned the Lessing Prize thing, because she is just, as we would say, throwing paint at the canvas, but she's not. She's constructing a precision timepiece. I mean, and you kind of have to ask yourself, why didn't she just come out and say, why don't we just live like the Greeks did? They did it better. No, you can't do that.
Yeah.
You've gotta, she tells it as a story. And that's, to me, what's the heartbreaking thing about it. Because when you see a good story, when you watch a good film, when you read something, you come out of it slightly changed in an emotional way. And maybe that's what she's trying to do here.
Is there any kind of happy ending to this story in this essay? I mean, usually Arendt has a happy ending, or at least has a hope.
No, the best I could do was the ironic easy, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. I mean, this one does seem one of her more, I mean, a lot of her essays are very pessimistic, but there's a turn at the end. The end of this one, is still about loss of a common world. There's no real turn. She does seem in this essay to really believe that through world alienation, this turn towards an interiorization and a subjectivization of the world, we have lost touch with the common world.
Well, actually, so I think maybe you have to see this, and I'm not quite sure, but maybe, and maybe Lindsay or anyone can ask about it, see it within the context of the flow of her entire work. But, I think it has to go along with this notion of, natality and new ideas and stuff like that she brings in. And the one thing that I've been thinking about a lot with her, and the one word that kind of keeps coming back, is imagination. I think our world lacks imagination. I think she was bursting with imagination. So maybe that's a hopeful way to take out of it.
That's great. Well, why don't we let other people come in then? Do any of our panelists, we have a number of panelists here. I'm going to ask you when you speak to just introduce yourself very briefly, and then we'll take some questions. And then we can also bring in people from the webinar. Margot, you can start.
Okay, just very quickly. I knew Hannah Arendt a little bit, and and I'm a great fan of the Hannah Arendt Center at Bard. At any rate, I find this epilogue just heartbreaking, because she talks about, in one paragraph, about totalitarianism and the loss of fact and the building of, quote, fact into something which is then called fact, but is not fact. Well, we've just lived through 4 years of this. And I never thought, I mean, it seems as if Hitler and Stalin, Mussolini are way in the past, but they're not. They're not.
Yes, they're, yes. I, in a funny way, I've had to have a double feeling about sort of trying to bring, as Roger and all of us, trying to bring Hannah Arendt back into the world. There's one huge part of her thinking I wish would become obsolete, but it can't. It doesn't. But there's also good parts of her thinking that, yeah.
No, but she helps us. She helps us make sense of what Margot's talking about. And by the way, she wrote about the loss of facts and the victory of common fantasies, not just in the 1940s and 50s, but she came back to it with a vengeance in her last 8 or 9 essays in the 1960s and 70s. She was concerned with the lying by the Kennedy and Johnson administrations in the Vietnam War. She was considered with what she considered to be the lying by technocrats and experts, something she talked a lot about. She thought that Keynesian economists she attacked in her last essay called Home to Roost. And she thought that they were engaged in a systematic lying about the economy. And all of this in her work is rooted, and even her arguments about Hitler and Stalin and the totalitarianism lying of that period, in this idea that she's developing in this essay called world alienation, in this idea that increasingly we live a world, the Ding an sich in Kant is out there and we don't care about it. We live a world in which what matters is our representations and our interior views of things. And as a result, the world and its commonness becomes increasingly less attractive and compelling to us. And we can create increasingly castles in the sand in our heads. And those are more and more meaningful. And so it's a willingness and ability to live without impartiality, as Ken was saying, without having to test our patterns of the facts against other people's patterns of the facts.
I mean, I think another word that she uses there is reality. I mean, you got to face reality. That's another thing she says. And, truth, again, the question is, what truth and reality, she uses words in a lot of different ways, but I think, denying what's really in front of your eyes is a first step. And that's one of the things, is denying that every person has dignity. I mean, that's a big step to deny, I think, to denying reality. Maybe, I don't know.
Great. Lindsay, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, that was wonderful. Thanks, Ken. I just want to go back to the question of imagination, because I actually agree with Margot. When I reread this essay, when I got to the epilogue this afternoon, again, it was devastating. And you kind of should see it coming. But you're going along and you're thinking, well, this is interesting, ancient history, Marx, yeah. And then you suddenly, it's history as murder in these short, and you're there and you're in it. And it's like a novel, in terms of how you move through those ideas. And I was really struck, Ken, by you demonstrated in your presentation, and also in your Escapes of Hannah Arendt book, you said sort of there's no way out of this en page. There's no kind of negative theology. There's no kind of like, we're just not going to do it, right? Or the kind of pathos and melancholy that you get with other critical theorists. What she does is tell the story, and it's in that act of telling the story that the poignancy and the meaning is made present as a form of hope, I think. But she's not doing anything else. I mean, it's the utter attention to detail with which she does that that always strikes me. There's an ethics in that relentlessness.
Yeah, it is. It's tragic. I mean, it feels tragic. I mean, it does feel tragic, but if you look at tragedies, they give you a sense of profound despair, but also a sense of kind of exaltation at the same time. So, and she's not one to sugarcoat things. We know that. So, you know,
it's also, it's just, I mean, I was going to just end with asking you a question and others here, because what is so, you also said, you know, the thing about making narrative into space or making history into space, you can see things again. And what's so exciting about this project for me as a writer and a literary historian is to be surrounded by artists who are taking that kind of storytelling and making space out of it. And there's something I've been really fascinated by all the shows that have been released so far, but all the conversations about how when you ask what meaning might be or understanding, how that very act of making art through engagement with narrative, through the engagement with history telling and storytelling is producing something else.
Yeah, and Benjamin's another great fan of visual, great person there, but I think it has to do with this notion of action, of presentness, of exposure, of, you know, that evanescence of, you know, that moment between past and future, which is just gone. So then what do? We look, and, you know, like I say again with the, and I'm so honored to be with people who really know, and someone who actually met Hannah, I'm so jealous. But anyways, you know, these are the thoughts, promise and forgiveness. I mean, everything is about how do we deal with this arrow of time that we're riding on. And yeah, this is kind of tragic, but I do, you know, one of my little quips about Hannah Arendt, and I could recommend you guys to another wonderful book called, I think it's called Tough Enough, Unsentimental Women. And it's written by a professor at the University of Chicago. And the first essay is about Hannah, and it's just great. Lindsay, do you ever name it hand?
It's Deborah Nelson.
Deborah Nelson. And this notion of unsentimentality and, you know, the other people that she talks about, you know, Mary McCarthy, Diane Arbus, and whatever. But, you know, I think that as part of this totality of her thinking, she's a person that lives in action. And maybe that's why artists are attracted to this thinking. I don't know.
Yeah, let's, I know Peter wants to join in, so let's hear from one of the artists. Peter, you got to unmute.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking, because there's wonderful vignettes in your book, Ken. I mean, it's great.
Oh, thank you.
And one of them is what we're talking about. You're talking about Hannah being in New York, and then you say, she says, and I'm not far from John Coltrane, who's,
oh, yeah.
and that idea of John Coltrane was a wonderful analogy to Hannah Arendt, and because you're talking about thinking and making, you say that in the book, you know, and that feels to me why I don't find it pessimistic at this essay, because she is always talking about, I mean, it's unreality that is depressing, or fixed systems. You know, we're talking about what she said about Marx. There's a flow to it all, as there is in Coltrane, and there's jumps, and like in her, there's aphorisms, there's bits. Everything's about thinking and making, and I find that very inspiring.
Gosh, first of all, Peter, thank you so much for noting that. You know, again, it's one of those things, if I'm kind of doing the Walter Benjamin diving for pearls thing, Coltrane was blowing the doors off of the world down in the village, while Hannah Arendt was working uptown, and to think of them as people that were in that same world doing the same thing of riding that wave, that was an important thing for me to add to it, because I believe, you know, we're creatures of our time and space. So thank you. And that's overall where I find, you know, kind of inspiration in her. But so I guess this tour de force essay, while it is completely a gut punch at the end, you know, we're happy that it's there. But thank you, Peter.
Sarah. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to say I'd like to reread this essay to understand its meaning better, because I've been through it too quickly. But when one begins reading this, right from the very beginning, you can see that she's talking about greatness and great men writing history. And it seems to me that all our conversations are trying to put what she puts in extraordinarily long sentences, referring to extraordinarily great men in inverted commas, into very, very simple terms. And I think this is not looking precisely at other meanings of what's going on, because I noticed Brache is here. If I were trying to analyze this, and once again, I found it incredibly frustrating that the first place of publication is not mentioned here. So one of you may know this, I don't have access to the complete books. She's using these, it seems to me, I would say, if I had to analyze this whole thing, as a kind of form of reparation. She's the most un-1968 in America, in New York person you can possibly imagine. She's actually looking back to this enormous tradition of great men trying to come to terms with the fall of ancient Greece, with the fall of Rome, with the problem of writing history in general, after something that is equally shocking, i.e. obviously totalitarianism and so forth. And she's completely out of sync with what's going on. But she is deliberately and always, and this is why it's difficult for us to read, she's always using extremely long sentences, which are extremely fluent, which are demonstrations in a way of her mastery and her authority. And also they're very, although they're very long, they're quite simple, because one imagines that they're aimed at a certain vaguely intellectual audience who this is written for. And obviously it's very dated in a certain way, because we are not those people who were those intellectual readership of the 1960s. But nonetheless, she's using these great figures, I would argue, as a kind of reparative device for herself, as well as a kind of lament for the impossibility of ever being able to write about these things in that way. I mean, the very fact that she is, shall we say, a mistress rather than a master, or at least an expert in the essay form. At the same time, people in France are writing in the essay form. She's not trying to be Gibbon or Tocqueville or whatever, because she knows that's impossible. She's writing these very, very eloquent things in an essay form, which are always already anachronistic because of her style and her address and her insistence on beginning always with ancient Greece and things. And yet they are functioning for her in a way that Spiegelman and Mauss and co. were able to function for the society at which they were aimed, a society that would be incapable of reading these sentences and referring to these figures. So, I mean, I think the introduction of Mauss was extremely interesting and, of course, extremely relevant. But I would like us to look at the deliberate exercise of style that she's doing, and beneath that exercise of style, what is going on for her as an exiled European after what she's been through, in a context where all her reference are becoming increasingly irrelevant, or if not irrelevant, opaque to most people. So I just wanted to say that little thing about her style and her references, and the fact that she's really out of sync with the contemporaneity of her age and her environment and her context.
Yet we still muddled through. I mean, I can't think of a lot of other people that write these sort of lugubrious, no, they're wonderful.
Well, I mean, Arthur Koestler,
dense essays.
I haven't got Arthur Koestler to hand, but he had a terrible experience too. He's writing in Encounter magazine at the same time. the device is always to refer to the great European past, which has collapsed.
Well,
And, you know, the whole device of great men, if you want to think of it as a device rather than a signified, is to do with this feeling of loss. And it isn't unusual just to her. It's a kind of style of the period, I would think. And so that's why I like engaging with it today or teaching it today. It's complex.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting, I mean, there's no doubt that many of her references are going to be difficult and opaque to people, right? And we haven't even mentioned the wonderful citation of Rilke's, which she refuses to translate in the text because it can't be translated. Right? This is another one of those, you know, moments, right, where no, we're not going to translate it because it can't be translated. And if you go to the footnotes, she'll take someone's translation of it in a free form. But you know, I think we have to grapple with the fact that she is someone who knows the entire tradition of German poetry and Western thought, much of it by heart. And yet, you know, take Ken's intervention, which is, yet we're still today, 85 of us, you know, for most of this call, struggling through this essay. She speaks to us in a way that's incredibly relevant and powerful. And I think that's a challenge to think it through. I do think you're right, Sarah, about the style and sentences of this essay. When I said earlier that this is one of her most difficult essays, there's a number of reasons. One of which is, I think it's one of her essays that has the least sort of, I think it's hard to tell this essay as a story. I think Ken's done a remarkable job of trying. Most of her essays, I think, can be told as a story, and they often veer this way and that way. They're not logical. But this one is difficult. And another is, this is one of the essays she writes with the most academic apparatus of all of her essays. I mean, most of her essays don't have this many footnotes, this many foreign citations, things like that. And so it's a challenge. And I think Ken did a remarkable job sort of telling the story. Bracha, I know Sarah had invoked you. Did you want to add anything?
I can only add my associations, and there are two. And I think that this can, because for me, the question is, how can we read, and how do we read anything, not only Hannah Arendt, but especially right now Hannah Arendt, in our time, where for her, you could see very clearly that there are objects and subjects and object position subject. You have the private, the inner, you have the outside, you have the model of immortality, which is history, and then mortality, which is the human person, and so on. You have all these kind of blocks, what I would say today, even though it's open and it goes to many directions. She lives in a world in which it is still possible to pose it like that, inside and outside, beginning and ending. I like the joke of Ken, and I would turn it upside down to say, we know we will leave it in the end, but we don't know that we entered. That's the situation now, is you enter a world full of different stories and full of, you don't anymore know whether who's the subject screen, the screen that tells you that this is whatever we are relating to. So the question is how to navigate and work with her thinking now, where there's a real paradigmatic change. I mean, we had the Industrial Revolution, and so this is one thing. The second thing I was thinking is that, in a sense, it's about, you said there is Marx, there is Einstein, and there's Freud. And Freud is the most hidden at least in the story told politically. But it is Freud after the pleasure principle and the death drive presentation, where the death enters into one of the major drives of human being. And so, but I recently looked at a life drive in Freud and analyzed life drive. And what I realized is that life drive in Freud is entirely death drive. I talked to Sarah here as well. Because what are the parameters of life drive in Freud? These are the parameters of the amoeba, the unicells, anything that can be transmitted endlessly. It is the immortality imagined as a unicell that divides itself and therefore replaces itself and continues. It is as if, not death drive, but life drive does not relate to the human. This is where, for me, art enters, and Ken's book enters, and drawing enter, and that we are faced with the fact that the notions that were served to define did not relate to humanized life.
Well, thank you. I mean, in my book, and again, mine is not a scholarly, I mean, it is in a way, but it's more of a biography in that I wanted to get to the thought through the life rather than just the thought through the world of thought. And I think this death, you know, I think, and I don't know, and I could be wrong, but there's something about, to use the old term, the distaff, the female, the feminine, the whatever gender appropriate term, that is a natality kind of a way maybe of looking at things. And I think that was part, you know, this could be, you know, the artistic interpretation. You know, I sometimes think she didn't actually have any children. We're all her children. You know, the whole world is her children, you know, and I do think there is life. There is a lot of life versus sort of the man this, and we're born to die, and death is the defining factor. And you can't deny that. But I tend to look at her as possibility. And that's why I say imagination. And,
yeah.
You know.
Can I say something to that?
Yes.
Sure.
It's true that what is important probably is the way she inserts natality and life and the new which is born. But this, we can take it into a whole other question, because does this mean the new? What is new? Can we equal it with newness? And this respond to the same structure of subjectivity. And finally, probably
well, she says we, yeah, she says we make new stuff. Sorry, Barbara.
Yeah, no, but the new is, well, if you're a mother, the new is not entirely new, if I can say it in one word. There is something about this newness of the new, which is very hurtful. And in that sense, I think we're still in period of Heidegger, but I have a question to you and to Roger. Can I?
Please.
And your interpretation. Because she says something which inspired me about what is sacred. And she goes through Christianity to say that finally man invented space of sacredness, which boils down to self-interest. And she says that with the Hebrew, where life is sacred, we come to the question of self-interest. Now, it's a question, but from my knowledge, the Christian interpretation comes here, because in Judaism, this is not the way, I mean, all the rabbinic interpretation and generation of interpretation of the sacredness of life is the commandment, you shall not kill. It's the life of the other. it's not self-interest, it's not my life. And so there's something very Protestant, because she could take it from her interest in the sacred. And what was the meaning of that? That the meaning is the life of the other and not the life of the self.
Well, I don't have that quote to hand, but
I have it here.
but that's,
What page are you on, Bracha? Do you know what page it's on?
No, I photocopied it. Maybe it's 49 or 50.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, one thing that I've always been intrigued as I was doing the book, and, you know, I mentioned a little bit about ethics and whatnot, and that took me a little bit to starting to read Levinas. And, you know, and I was always very curious about any kind of relationship intellectually or whatever between Levinas, who's the great philosopher of the other, and also a student of Heidegger, you know, and maybe, you know, and I was kind of wondering, and I'm not a professional philosopher, but, you know, does he in a way complete some of the loose ends that were maybe left? But I think my memory of that is you know, I'm not that particular paragraph. Maybe Roger can elucidate a little bit more.
Well, I don't know where Bracha's reading from. I mean, she talks about Christianity.
49. She says that upon the altogether different teaching of the Hebrews, who always held that life itself is sacred, more sacred than anything else in the world, and so on, connected with this inner conviction of the sacredness of life as such, which has remained with us even after security of the Christian faith in life after death has passed away, is the stress on the all importance of self-interest, still so prominent in all modern political philosophy. Now, it's true that it is prominent, but it is, I doubt it that this is the Hebrew tradition, because
No, I don't think she's saying it is.
she got it wrong.
Well, I don't think she got it wrong. She's she's saying that. I think, you know, again, I'd have to look at this, and I can't find but I mean, I think what she's saying is that there's a fundamental concern with life in the Hebrew tradition. And to some degree, that self-interest, whether that's right for a Jewish interpretation or not, connects with self-interest in the modern age. And she's contrasting it to what she considers to be the ancient Greek and Roman idea that the world is more important than the individual. She says that what courage in politics means is that we care about the world more than we care about ourselves. And that means we're willing to die for the world. You know, she's critical of the human rights tradition, for example, which elevates human life and the protection of human life above meaning and belonging to a world. And so, you know, I don't think she's equating the Hebraic tradition with utilitarianism at all. I think she's simply saying that there are a number of cultures and times at which there's a sacredness that is concerned with the individual, and that is part of the world alienation that she's talking about.
No, I agree with you, but that's not. But she begins it with that Jewish Hebrew tradition, which probably is looking through Protestant glasses, because that's not the Hebrew tradition. That's what
Well,
I'm saying.
you know, it could be.
Has something else to
Yeah.
tell.
Again, without studying it that deeply, I mean, she's trying to write a narrative, and it could be that she's saying that when this happened, it invalidated the heroic notion of, you know, the Greek historiographers because they were pagan or something. But I think that, you know, I don't know. I mean, I think the problem is this sort of atomization where, like, everybody, you know, we get these, it's, I mean, I would think just, you know, it's okay to have self-interest. The difficult thing is accepting someone else's self-interest. You know, and then she says we're all just, because then we can't know when we act, we don't know what's going to happen. The only thing we know for sure is, if we're really being honest, that when we do something, because there are a lot of other people, we don't really know what's going to happen. It's that uncertainty thing. But I don't know if she's criticizing the fact that people have self-interest. I mean, I think that makes for heroic deeds, sort of.
No, she's not criticizing self-interest to court. She's simply saying that if you think that self-interest is sacred, then you can't think the world is sacred. And that's, I think,
and that's why she got it, in my view, upside down, but it's up to you to research it.
Okay.
But I was thinking that if we believe that the sacred is not in that sense, either inside or outside, and not even in the Hebrew, and not the way she historicized it, then you have a passage there for that which, you know, for the aesthetic and for the ethics and for the sacred, which is not translated into interest of the self, you know, which is another opening, another kind of freedom. And maybe it has to do with some aspects of the feminine. Maybe Sarah hints at that she could not at that time gauge.
Bracha, just so you know, for everyone who wants to follow, Margot found the quote. It's on pages 52 to 53 in the Penguin edition. And she says, just so we have it, connected with this inner conviction of the sacredness of life as such. That's what she's really getting at. And whether she's right that the Jews had this tradition of the sacredness of life as such, I don't know. I mean,
they do, but in the sense of the life of the other is more important than you. Okay. And also the life of the idea, the sacredness of life, which is put in the name of God, whatever you call it, is more important than you. And for the rest, you can measure your life, the life of another, and so on. But you shall not kill, this is where Levinas began.
Yeah.
That you shall not kill is the meaning of life. And that's
whereas, as you know, Bracha, for Arendt, shall not kill is not a first commandment for the meaning of life, because there are times when you have to kill.
Yeah.
You know, she's gonna not accept that.
No, but Judaism will also say there is a time where you have to kill. It's very nuanced. It's very deep.
Yeah.
And also Levinas have another level where you can measure.
Yeah.
Puts it in a strange way, in a lovely way. I'll tell you, you come before me. You'll tell me, but you come before me. And then on the social level and political, we'll have to do some agreements. But it's not on the level of the sacred.
All right. Thank you. I'm gonna. Yeah, go ahead.
Roger.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Vivian. I read this believing it was written by 1958. 58. Is that not correct? It doesn't sound 68-ish. It sounds.
No. This was written around 55, 56, I believe.
Right, when she was working on it. Okay. So, could I say in thinking about, you know, what Margot had to say, what Lindsay had to say about this epilogue. I think Lindsay used the word devastating, the end of it. It's true. Apart from her style being Germanic, there's other people have said, and long sentences, etc. She's so post-war. She's so post-war. And Sarah, I found your analysis of, not technically of her style, but analyzing her from whence she comes, so who it is who's writing what she's writing and how she's writing it and why. I really, really appreciated that. And I think that this is such a beautiful essay. At the end of it, I think that, you know, all of you were speaking at a certain point about, is there any space or room for optimism or something, whatever. Optimism is not something that happens to interest me personally, but the spirit of it, the mood of it reminds me so much of Jean Giraudoux, his play, La guerre de Troie n'aura pas lieu, the Trojan War will not take place. It's so much like the spirit of this essay, and you and all of you have touched on you know, past, present, future, and that play does too, because you know the outcome, you know what the devastating outcome is going to be, and yet throughout or in the present moment, you're always thinking till the very end or even beyond that maybe this will not, this terribleness, this devastation, this tragedy will not unfold. It will not happen like that. And so I'm so sorry that I'm pained actually by the fact that, Roger, when you said that Arendt and Adorno hated one another, I can completely see why. I can completely see that if she was so close with Benjamin, she would have, you know, I could see why. But I know that Adorno isn't likable in the way that Arendt is with her love of the world, and Benjamin is with his gorgeous poetry and aesthetic sensibility. But anyway,
Vivian, let me pick up on the optimism question, and let me combine it with a question that's in the chat, and then let Ken respond. Ken, in the chat, there's a question that says, history in its modern version, this is a quote from the text, I believe. History in its modern version was conceived primarily as a process. It showed a peculiar and inspiring affinity to action, which indeed, in contrast to all other human activities, consists first of all of starting processes. And Jeff Glaza in the chat says, isn't that the final optimistic note? I'm wondering what you think of that, and also Vivian's question about the optimistic tone.
Yeah,
I don't think it doesn't have an optimistic tone. I don't think it does. Yeah, that's all.
I think when Vivian was talking about that emotion that came through in that play, which I'm not familiar with, that even in the face of imminent loss, in the moment you can have this, if I'm not misinterpreting what you said, this, dare I say, hope? I'm not quite sure if it's hope. I don't even know what it is, possibility. Yeah, I think action, the free
is
will.
hope optimism? Hope is not optimism, is it? Hope is not optimism. Hope
Okay,
is hope.
well, I don't want to conflate those. I haven't seen the play, but the fact that you think you can do something, let's just say you think you can always do something, even in that French movie where the guy had to write a book by just blinking, you know, he could do something. So I do think that the possibility of action and is that is sacred. I think that is sacred to her. The fact that we can act, that thing, the fact that, you know, we can act as much as we can, which is a line to freedom. The question then becomes, what happens if other people are acting and we're all in a room together and we're in a world together?
I think what's sacred to Arendt and what it is that we have, almost the only thing we have that nobody can take away is thinking. And if there's any, and the thing is that she talks a lot about action, and it seems a lot of people in common sense thinking oppose thinking and action, but for Arendt, actually, it's naturally it's more complicated, and they're the same thing. Thinking is action, and that's what we have. And thinking and that space, this is what this whole, you know, collection is actually about. That gap, it's critical activity. That's action. Thinking is action. That's
well,
what
Vivian, a great setup, and not to shill my own book here, but I happen to have it open to the very last image, which is her bestride the globe after she's in her ethereal state because she passed on the previous page.
She's in heaven, yeah.
She's in the universe. She's not in heaven.
She's in the universe.
She's in the cosmos.
Yes.
And she's thinking
with Sputnik.
A direct quote from her: to be alive and to think are the same thing. So, D. Duncan. Duncan. Duncan is the donut. Yeah. So.
One of the things we
Duncan for Duncan.
Yeah. One of the things we didn't talk about in this essay, Ken, is how she says the most dangerous thing that the concept of history brings is the potentiality to act. Right. So on page 63, she says it is beyond doubt the capacity to act is the most dangerous of all human abilities and possibilities. And it is also beyond doubt that the self-created risks mankind faces today have never been faced before. Considerations like these are not at all meant to offer solutions or to give advice. At best, they might encourage sustained and closer reflection on the nature and the intrinsic potentialities of action, which never before has revealed its greatness and its dangers so openly.
Yeah, I mean, basically you could say that at any time in history, but now with obviously the bomb and global warming, you name it. I mean, the power of technology that we have unleashed, so that tool so amplifies what we can do. We are, I wrote in my original reading of it next to that, and I underlined it and I put next to it responsibility. And I don't know. I mean, I think it's sort of like, maybe this has something to do with that notion of the other. Like, I mean, what's kind of interesting, what's going on here, and it's going on everywhere with this vaccination and this virus. You can live in a gated community and get it, but if everybody doesn't kind of get it to get the vaccine to that 85% threshold, we're not good. So that's responsibility to others. We're linked. And that's why I say those who scoff at this as some sort of pipe dream need to take another look. But yes, the action. And I think the action without, the difficult thing, is the action without the outcome, which starts really leaning into politics. And maybe she touches on it later in here, I can't remember. But if you start really thinking about politics, she did not have a very friendly relation with the notion. Although she believed that politics was the highest thing, she didn't like politicians very much. Because they say, do this and this is going to happen, do that and that's going to happen. And that's kind of what they have to do. But is that really real, there's that word, is that real? And then it comes back to Roger's notion, which I think is, which I want to ponder more about meaning, because, you know, I guess if we can say it means, we get more meaning if everybody in the world doesn't die. That's kind of a place where she would like people to be. And then you would have to say, how do we get to that place? And you could say alienation, or you could say common world, or you could say the virus, get 85% people vaccinated, or I don't know. I mean, again, she's a provocateur. So I think, Roger, on that thing, I noted that too, because it's almost like it's almost like it's almost like one of those things you get at the end of a commercial for a drug, when you see it on TV. Considerations like these are not all meant to offer solutions or give advice. Past performance is no, I mean, she's almost like, she's like trying to say, but she is saying, better get off our asses, because it really counts, which I kind of think is what she's always saying. So my wrestling with it is, as Sarah was saying, yeah, it's, I don't know why it's difficult and complex, but within, I hate that word unpack, because but within it, and this one might be a particularly, and there may be some other things going on as a historian, and I don't know, it's written in 55. What was going on with her and Heidegger at the time? Had she said, will you give me, will you, I was going to dedicate Human Condition to you, but I never heard from you. Who knows? I mean, why does this thing have this edifice? I mean, this is built like a castle. And I don't know. And again, not being able to read German, which, I'm sorry, I just went off on a riff there, but.
It's all right, Ken. We're coming to the end, and I wanna thank you all for being here. I mean, I think it's not just bluster when she says don't take this as advice. I think she is, as you said at the very beginning, she's, I don't know, bomb thrower is the right word, but something like that. She likes to make people think, and she doesn't think she has the answers. She never thinks she has the answers. I don't think there's an answer in this. There's an attempt to make you think about the way the world has been impoverished in its meaningfulness by the turn to historicism, which ignores greatness and individual events and instead seeks to articulate patterns historically, but also into the future that are supposed to, bring about some utopia or some idea, and that's the worry that really I think, as Ken says, is the story that weaves these crazy pages together at times.
Well, thank
Ken,
you.
you want to make a final comment?
It was just very challenging but bracing, like all of her work is, and it gave me an opportunity. Thank you to do this, and thanks everybody for being here. And I do think you have to wrestle with it. And sorry for the bad joke about Dunkin' Donuts, whoever mentioned that in the chat. And I think I'm a little tired.
Jokes are good. Jokes are good. No joke is bad.
Yeah. I mean, she did like the occasional humor. I mean, she was a fan of it. So, and one of the things I guess I tried to do in my book, and hopefully tried to do in my interpretation of this, is I wanted to deal with Hannah Arendt before she became Hannah Arendt. Like, I was really interested in the fact that she was living in a cold water 4th floor walk up on 95th Street and West End Avenue, right where I used to live, with her husband and her mother. I mean, that to me was really, really interesting. So that was before, and she was working as an au pair for some people and then the only job she could get was taking like the IRT to the BMT to get to Brooklyn College, and heaven knows what she was teaching there. So yeah, this is what interested in me. So Anyways, thank you so much. It's a fantastic group.
Thank you, Ken. And
Thank you, Ken.
thanks to Richard and
you.
Saltoon Gallery and all
Thank
of
you,
you guys
Roger.
for being here. We'll
Thank
see
you.
you. I think the next meeting is April 21st. Is that correct, Richard?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
April 21st. And we'll be here talking about what is authority, one of the great essays in this volume. So really look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.